Hi everyone and welcome to Book Boop. My name is Rachel and today I'm going to do the obligatory mid-year freakout tag. If you've not heard of this tag, where have you been? Because I feel like everybody on BookTube has done this tag. This is kind of the repetitive tag that happens every single year and I always forget about it until I see everybody else posting it. I'm like, oh yeah, it is halfway through the year, isn't it? Also, I feel like I'm out of breath. I just climbed the stairs really quickly. And I think I need to work out more because my goodness, I'm feeling out of breath. But I have a series of questions. We're just going to kind of chat about how my reading year has been going so far, what I've liked, what I haven't liked, what things I'm looking forward to, all that kind of stuff. So it's just a fun little checkup on how my reading year is going. So let's go ahead and jump in. So the very first question here is the best book you've read so far this year. And please give me a little bit of patience here because I'm going to pull up some images for you for covers so that you can actually see them. But the answer to this question is The Bone Houses by Emily Lloyd-Jones. I sadly do not own this in my collection yet, but this has been probably one of my favorite books I have read this year. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Absolutely love it. I saw it all over the place on Instagram, on BookTube before it came out and kind of right when it came out. But then after that, I feel like nobody talked about it. I feel like nobody ended up really reading it. And I absolutely adored this book. I loved everything about it. I loved the plot. I loved the characters. I loved the pacing. I loved everything about this book. If you've never heard about this book before, we follow this girl who's living in a small village and she helps maintain the village's graveyard. And they've had an issue in the past with what they call bone houses, which are people that come back from the dead, kind of zombie-ish, but not dangerous. They just kind of come back from the dead and sort of wander around and they're not like fully there. They can't talk or anything. But then some start coming out of the woods outside of the village and those are actually starting to become a little bit more threatening and dangerous and actually trying to harm people. And so she ends up going into a journey through the forest to figure out what's going on, why the bound houses have all of a sudden become honestly kind of violent and terrifying and why they're starting to converge on her village, what is going on. And it was so good and I adored it. I'm hoping to get this into my collection sometime this year because I absolutely love this book and it was a great time. All right, the next question we've got here is the best sequel I've read so far this year. So I have read several sequels this year, but a lot of them really haven't stood out a whole lot. But one that I did actually really enjoy and kind of I would say stood out the most was Capturing the Devil by Kerri Maniscalco. This is the final book in the Stalking Jack the Ripper series. It's the 4th one, and I actually was really pleasantly surprised with how this series wrapped up. I really, really enjoyed the plot direction of this one. I was so excited to see the way that things were tied up from the first 3 books into this one, because at first, the first 3 books felt very siloed, if that makes sense. They felt very separate. But this one actually pulled all the stories together in a really cool way that I was really excited to see. I can't say how they were pulled together because that'd be a huge spoiler, but my goodness, I was so excited with the direction this series took in this book. So I enjoyed it a lot. If you haven't heard of this series before, we follow this girl named Audrey Rose who's living in the late 1800s in London, and she is interested in forensics and wants to study forensics, and that's something that doesn't normally happen for women. Usually women aren't in that particular career path, and it's just following her and her basically going through these different murder mysteries that are connected to different famous, usually mostly famous murderers throughout history. So anyways, this has been really interesting and it was a really fun conclusion and wrap up to the series. So that one was really, really great. The next one, here we go. New releases you haven't read but want to. And I apologize, I'm looking away from the screen so much. I'm looking between my notes and also pulling up pictures and everything for you. So one of the books that has come out very recently, it came out in May, is the second book to the Aurora Rising series. I think that's the series it's called. It's called Aurora Burning. This is by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. And I really loved the first book a lot. And I'm really, really wanting to get back into this series, into this world. And I can't wait to see where it goes. We're following this misfit crew of kids, basically. They're in their late teens or early 20s, and they're traveling through space as a crew together, and they are facing some pretty harrowing things, and they're basically trying to save the universe. And it's a lot of fun. You follow every single perspective of the person in this crew. I think there's 6 different people, and each chapter, like, we follow a different perspective, but it was a lot of fun, and I love all the characters. It's witty, it's amazing. If you've read the Illuminae Files series by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff, it's got a very similar feeling, very witty dialogue, high stakes. It's a lot of fun. So this is one I still need to get to, and I really, really want to get to this year. The other one that I really want to get to, and this one will not be a surprise because I feel like it's one everyone's been excited about this year and wanted to read, and that is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This is the prequel that just came out to The Hunger Games, the really, really big sort of post-apocalyptic story that came out years ago. Huge series franchise, huge movie franchises as well. I can't say the word franchise without my mouth getting tied up. But this one follows a prequel. We're learning about President Snow, or who he is before he's President Snow, which is basically the main villain of the Hunger Games trilogy. So I'm a little bit hesitant about this one because I do really love origin stories, but I don't like President Snow. I want to not like President Snow. I don't want you to try to convince me to sympathize with him in any way. And I don't think this story necessarily does that from what I've heard, but it seems very polarizing so far. People either really, really enjoyed it a lot, and some people hated it. Some people thought it was slow. Some people thought it was paced well. So I have honestly no idea what to expect. But I'm excited to read it and excited to see what I think. I have it on a hold at the library. I'm hoping it'll come to my turn soon so I can finally jump into the story and see what happens and get some early look at what the Hunger Games looked like when it kind of first started out. All right, so next question is most anticipated release for the second half of the year. So I had 3 books that I could answer this question to, but one of them unfortunately has been pushed to, I believe, March of 2021, and that's Bridge of Souls by Victoria Schwab. That's the 3rd book in the oh my goodness, the name of the series is escaping me, the City of Ghosts series. It's the middle grade series. It's one of my favorite series right now, and it was going to come out in August or September of this year, and it got pushed. So I can't really say that one because that one's for next year, but I do have a couple I'm very excited about coming out at the end of the year, and it's V.E. Schwab, or Victoria Schwab, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This is a book that V.E. Schwab has been working on for a very long time. This is sort of her child, her sweet child that she's finally let out into the world for us to read. I believe it comes out in November. Oh my goodness, I should know better. But I think it's later this year, in the fall of this year, and I am so excited about it. Some people have gotten advanced reader copies of it, and I've heard nothing but good things so far. All I know about it is it's this girl who wants to live forever, but then she makes a deal with the devil, and the deal is that he will let her live forever, but no one will ever remember who she is. So I think right after someone meets her, talks to her, they immediately forget who she was. So she's basically a ghost. She's a living ghost. People never remember her. And then I think she finally meets someone in the future who all of a sudden is able to remember her, and it's the only person that ever has. So it sounds like it's going to be a really interesting story. It sounds like it probably will be kind of heartbreaking. It's going to be really cool to kind of see Addie LaRue's history of her life of living. I don't know how long she lives. I think she lives a really, really long time. So I'm really interested to read this. I'm excited to see what V. Schwab does with the story, and I think it's going to be really, really cool. The other one I'm excited about as well is Marissa Meyer is coming out with a new book this year, and she's doing something a little bit different. She's done a lot of, I would say, sort of sci-fi feelings of things. She did The Lunar Chronicles, which is a sci-fi spinoff of classic fairy tales with Cinderella, Red Riding Hood, Rapunzel, and Snow White. And then she also read the Renegade series, which is a sci-fi superhero and villain series, which was really incredible. Everything I have read by Marissa Meyer, I have absolutely adored. But she's trying something a little different this time. She is coming out with a romantic comedy, I think, a YA romantic comedy called Instant Karma. Now, I'm not usually a contemporary romance type of person. It is not my thing, but I love Marissa Meyer. She's an auto-buy author for me. I trust her. So I'm very excited to read this. And I believe this comes out later in the year as well, maybe November as well. I probably should have looked up when they were actually coming out, but I know they come out this year, later in the year. So I'm very excited about this and to see what Marissa Meyer does with more of a contemporary romance. I think it's going to be really fun to see her delve into a little bit of a different type of story. So this is the other one I'm excited to read this year. All right. Okay. Let's go to the next question to have our little chat here. What is my biggest disappointment for this year so far. So I have read a few stinkers this year, I ain't gonna lie. And one that I was really looking forward to reading, oh, this picture's not nearly as good as I thought it would be, but it's called The Missing Years by Lexie Eliot. I apologize that it's so small. This is a adult mystery thriller. And it's about this girl who grew up in Scotland, and some things happened with her family that she's kind of tried to move away from. And then her father, I think, her mother passes away. And because of that, now her childhood home has been passed along to her, and she has to return to her childhood village and her home and kind of deal with all of that. And some things in her past start to come back to the surface. It sounded like a really cool book. It sounded like it would have haunted house vibes, and I guess it sort of had a little bit of those vibes in it, but it felt very predictable. Some of the bigger twists didn't end up feeling twisty to me because I saw them coming, which is unfortunate because I normally don't see things coming, and I don't usually try to theorize and figure things out before they happen because I want to be surprised, but just certain things didn't surprise me. The only thing I liked about this book was the fact that it was very atmospheric. It definitely gave me that sort of foggy, greenery Scotland vibe, and I enjoyed that. But other than that, the story wasn't that great. I didn't really enjoy the characters. It just didn't end up doing it for me, which is a bummer because I'm trying to get into adult thrillers, and this one I was excited about, and it just was a stinker for me. It just wasn't for me, which was a huge bummer. Okay, now, I feel like I say okay now after every single question. I'm sorry. My biggest surprise for the year. So this goes along with what I said about Instacarmit with Marissa Meyer, which is the fact I am not a contemporary reader, especially contemporary romance. That kind of stuff makes me kind of gag a little bit because it usually has a lot of angst to it, and I'm just not someone that likes angst when I'm reading books. But this one, I was so shocked I loved, and that is Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell. I really enjoyed this a lot. This is a YA contemporary romance about a very unlikely romance between two teenage kids. It's about this boy who's kind of semi-popular, and he ends up kind of forcibly being around this other girl a little bit, and if they form a really sweet friendship, and then after that they form a really sweet romantic bond, and it is a really precious story, and I enjoyed it a lot. I was shocked. I was so shocked that I enjoyed this book, but I really loved it, and it was heartwarming. It was heartbreaking. It was just really well done to me, and I really enjoyed reading it, and I'm happy to say that now I feel a little bit more open to jumping into the genre and jumping into these kind of stories because I actually enjoyed it. Who am I? That's crazy. Let's move on to the next one here. We've got our new favorite author, either a debut author or someone new to me. And that one is going to be a very well-known author, probably to you, but is a new author to me, which is Leigh Bardugo. I have been delving into Leigh Bardugo's work this year. I read the Grisha trilogy as well as the Six of Crows duology, and I had never read anything by Leigh Bardugo before, and I was surprised to find that I actually enjoyed it a lot, even the Grisha trilogy. I went into it thinking I wasn't really going to enjoy it that much because it's a little bit of an older series. I felt like it was going to be too angsty for me, just too teenagery feeling for me, but I really enjoyed it a lot. I love the world building that Leigh Bardugo does. She has incredible world building that's complex kind of magic systems, complex order in her world, and her characters have great depth, and I really enjoy her writing. I really enjoy her witty dialogue. It's really fun to read her work. And so that has been a new experience for me, and I've really enjoyed reading Leigh Bardugo, and I'm looking forward to reading more. So that's kind of my new to me author. I'm sure it's not new to you, but I've really enjoyed reading Leigh Bardugo. Next one is my newest fictional crush. Now this is funny because normally I don't really crush on people in books. I did when I was younger, when I was like a teenager. But now that I'm in my 30s, I don't really crush on characters. I just don't, especially since I'm married too. I just don't find myself being as interested in romance aspects. I don't find myself fantasizing or thinking about specific characters or anything in books. But recently I have had one, and that is Thomas Cresswell from the Stalking Jack the Ripper series. Now, not specifically in this book. I didn't really like Thomas Cresswell's character in this book when we were introduced to him. He I just didn't really see why people liked him so much. But as I read the series and continued to get to know this character more, I really liked him a lot, and he kind of makes me swoon. And honestly, the reason he does is because he reminds me a lot of my husband. Thomas Cresswell has a tendency to be, he can say very romantic things, but he also has a tendency to take certain things and make innuendos out of them, which I know sounds really weird and kind of silly, but that's what my husband does. And it just reminds me so much of my husband, Robert. And so a lot of times I kind of imagined this is how he would behave if it was during this time period. So that's kind of why I was crushing on Thomas Cresswell a little bit, is because it just reminded me of my husband and his kind of witty thought processing and just like his banter and how he can be really, really sweet, but then he also can make jokes out of things, and I'm just like, oh, you did not just do that. So I really like Thomas Cresswell a lot. He's kind of my fictional crush at the moment, mainly because he reminds me so much of my husband. So there's my answer. My newest favorite character. So this one I'm really excited to tell you all about, because this is a book that not many people know about, and I read really recently and I really enjoyed a lot. And that is The Silver Gate by Kristen Bailey. This story is we're following this boy and his sister, and ever since his sister was born, she has had some developmental delays. And because of that, in this specific time period, I think the 1700s, 1600s, I don't know. It's kind of during that like medieval type feeling time period. Because the girl that has developmental delays, they think that she's a changeling. And normally when a child is considered a changeling, they leave it out in the forest alone to die. And that's what they told this family to do. But the mother refused to do that and kind of lives in isolation with her daughter to protect her daughter and be able to keep her. But in the future, his mother ends up passing away, and he ends up having to protect his sister and find somewhere where she can be safe from those who don't understand her. So the character that I really enjoyed in the story is Wynne herself. We get to have chapters in her perspective and being in her mind, and I loved it. I have never, first of all, read a book that had representation like this of someone who thinks a little bit differently than we do because of her developmental delays. I'm trying to remember the name of what it was called. Oh my goodness. Rubinstein-Tabby syndrome, a genetic condition that occurs in one of every 125,000 births. It's a complicated medical condition that affects those born with it in many different and varying ways. An individual has her own strengths and weaknesses, and in Wynne, she can be a reflection of only a small part of the broad depth and complexity of the genetic condition. But I loved getting to be in her head and getting to hear her thought processes and to hear her frustration too of how people have a tendency to discount her because of her issues and the fact that she's not able to think as quick on her feet as other people. Like she's just trying to tell someone something and she has trouble thinking of the words. And so a lot of times people will ignore her or put words in her mouth for her. Oh, you're trying to say this, and ignore her. And I just loved being in her mind, and I adored it. This is a part of a duology. The second book is out, and I really, really want to read it because I loved being in Wynne's head, and I loved her character and seeing that kind of representation. I thought it was fantastic, and I highly recommend it. All right, let's go to the next one. A book that made me cry. This one is so easy because I put myself out there and I made myself read a historical fiction. And just not any historical fiction. I made myself read one that I knew was emotional, and everybody that had read it said it was so good, but also really hard to read. And that is The Nightingale by Christine Hanna. This is an adult historical fiction following two sisters living in Nazi-occupied Paris and how they handle the whole situation. And it's a lot. It is a lot. This book was heavy. It was so well written. It was so good. The characters were so complex. The story was so compelling, but it wasn't comfortable. I'm used to reading books that are an escape, books that are fun. This is not fun to me. This was not a fun book. This was hard. This was difficult to read. I'm very glad I read it. It's very well written. It is a beautiful piece of literature, but my goodness, it freaking destroyed me. I cried so hard the last few chapters of this book. I'm thankful that my husband was not at home while I was reading this, because he probably would have looked at me like I was crazy, because I just laid in bed sobbing, trying to get to the last few chapters because it was just so heart-wrenching. Ooh, my goodness. And I'm not used to that. I'm not used to reading books that make me cry like that. I've had books that have made me feel a little choked up, a little sad, but not bawling. This made me bawl. Tears just pouring, just the waterworks. It was intense. So if you're interested in historical fiction, go for it. If you're interested in delving into historical fiction, this is a good place to start because it's very well done, but it is not an easy read. It's easy as in it's written well and it's easy to follow, but I just mean emotionally it is not an easy read. So it's good, but just go in knowing that. So this definitely made me sob. It was a rough one. All right, a book that made me very happy. Now, this is going to sound like a very strange book to say that made me happy, because you would think of like a happy-go-lucky type of book to pick. That's not what I picked. This is another one I really would love to have in my collection, and that is House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. I freaking loved this book. This is a retelling of The 12 Dancing Princesses, which is sort of a little-known fairy tale. I remember reading it before as a kid, but it's not one that like people do retellings of or you hear of. There's no Disney Channel original movie of it. There's no Disney movie of it or anything. So this is sort of a fairy tale that's not quite as well known and used. But my goodness, the atmosphere in this is chef's kiss. It is so good. It's got this sort of like dark manor at the edge of the sea with this island, and it's like haunted and creepy, and there's always a thunderstorm, and it's just the epitome of creepy feeling atmosphere, and I freaking adored it. This book made me so happy because of just the feeling it gave me. It just sucks you in, and this is the perfect book to sit and read with a thunderstorm, or just put on like I did, put on an ASMR room with a thunderstorm and a fire crackling, and you will be sucked into this book so fast. I loved it. It was so good, and I would love to reread it one day, and I really would love to have this in my collection too. So this book made me happy. It's a weird one to say made me happy, but it made me happy. All right, my most beautiful book I either bought or have been given this year. And that one was really, really easy for me to pick because this is a book I bought myself that I was so excited about. I have not read it yet. I think I'm going to read it really, really soon. And that is Pan's Labyrinth by, and I always say this name wrong, but Guillermo del Toro and Cornelia Funke, I think. This cover, look at this cover. It is so gosh darn pretty. I mean, it's just gorgeous. And then just without the cover itself, look how pretty this is. And just like the way the artwork is in the inside, it's just the most beautiful book, and I cannot wait to read it. I saw the movie years upon years ago. I think I saw it in theaters, but it's a little bit of an older movie. It's been out for a while, and I did really enjoy it. It's a very dark story. Very like Tim Burton-ish. Just think that. Very Tim Burton-ish, strange, dark story. And I just, as soon as this book came out, I saw that cover and I was like, one, I need to read that too. I gotta have that. That's gorgeous. Like, it's just so pretty. And it's just got that dark fairy tale feeling I just love. I'm just so excited to own this. And I can't wait to read it. I think it's gonna be great. The last final question here that I think is the hardest one to answer is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? Boy, howdy, what do I not need to read by the end of the year? I want to read all the books. I especially want to read the ones that I had mentioned earlier that have been recent releases, like Aurora Burning, The Invisible Life of Addie and LaRue, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, Instant Karma. There's a new Mary Downing Hahn that's coming out that's called Puppets Payback. It's like usually she does like separate ghost stories. This one's going to be like a mashup of like short stories of all like scary, creepy kid stories that I really want to read. That one's coming out, I think, 1st of September. And there's just so many backlist books that I want to read. I would love to read some of the more books that I have on my TBR cart in my bedroom, all my physical books. There's just so many books that I want to read. I have like 200 plus books on my want to read list on Goodreads, and I every time I look through that list, I want to read every single one of them right now. So I am just basically desperately trying to read as many books as I possibly can this year and just trying to get to all the things. And it's been a really great reading year. I have wanted to read I have put a goal of 70 books for this year, and I've already read over 50. So I'm doing good. I'm excited to see where the rest of the year goes. I hope you've enjoyed this tag. I hope you've enjoyed hanging out with me, kind of catching up on how my reading year has been. If you have posted a wrap-up video for this in the mid-year freakout tag, let me know down below. Can you put a link down below to your video? I would love to see it and just be able to catch up with you on what you've been reading. If there's certain questions you want to answer in this video, let me know down below. I mean, if you want to let me know what your favorite books in this year, your most disappointing book this year, what books you're excited to read still, that kind of thing, let me know down below too. This has been a fun tag, and if you want to do it, just do it. Everybody has been doing it. I don't think anybody tags specific people at the end of this video because literally everybody does this tag. So just do it. Even if it's late, like I feel like it's late when I'm doing it, just go ahead and do it. It's a lot of fun. On the side of the video over here is my logo. If you click on that, you can subscribe to my channel, follow me on my book journey. On this side of the video over here is a suggestion for another video if you want to watch another one right now. But thank you so much for watching. You rock, and don't forget to keep reading. Bye.